right, you're good to go.
Thank you. Okay, guys, take two. How to get your buyer offer accepted in multiples. I'm going to go ahead and screen share the RPA right now. We're going to reference some stuff there. Can everyone see it? Yeah? Great. Okay, so let's talk about some stuff that's not in the RPA real quick first. So some things that should accompany an offer each time are going to be pre-qualification letter from lender. Okay, so that should be with the offer every single time if there is a loan. Proof of funds, and proof of funds should be for the down payment, the entire down payment, and closing costs. Closing costs for a buyer are between 1.5% to 2% typically. Okay, so if I have $1 million loan, I have $1 million purchase offer I'm writing, and an 80% loan. That means the client is putting down 200,000, but 2% of $1 million is 20. So I'm going to show a proof of funds for my buyer for a minimum of 220,000. But if my buyer has more to show, I'm 100%, particularly in a super competitive market with multiple offers, I'm going to show that my client has more. Okay. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the climate of our market. Everybody knows, obviously, it's a seller's market. And, right now, a great property, you might be competing against 20 or 30 other offers. And what happens when we have that many offers, guys? Property price is going to go up and up, right? So our biggest concern with property price in getting your offer accepted is going to be if the buyer has a loan, the potential for the property not to appraise. Okay, and so when we're in this multiple offer situation, the listing agent knows that. And so a lot of times they're asking for you to remove the buyer's appraisal contingency, which might be okay, but not always. So if the appraisal contingency is lifted, the appraisal takes place and the property doesn't appraise for value, what happens? Does anyone have any idea? Okay, so what's going to happen is, let's say we have—
You have to pay the difference.
Yeah, you have to pay not you, the buyer might have to come in with the difference. You have no appraisal contingency though, or you have no appraisal contingency. So worst comes to worst, the buyer has to pay the difference or cancel under some other contingency they have, which is a little dishonest, a little unethical, right? Because it's just the appraisal that's not coming through. Typically, if a property doesn't appraise, you have some leverage to negotiate with the seller about either reducing the purchase price or to whatever the appraisal came in at, or maybe reducing it somewhat and the buyer coming in with the difference in price. But let's say we have $1 million purchase. There's the $800,000 loan, but the property appraises for $950,000. Well, the buyer's going to have to come in with their original 20%, $200,000, their closing costs, but they're also going to have to come up with $50K more in cash. That difference between the $950,000 appraisal and the $1 million purchase price, if the seller won't negotiate with them, and they have no motivation to negotiate with a buyer that doesn't have an appraisal contingency. Particularly in this market, they'll have backups that might be higher than that appraisal contingency. They might have cash backups that might be higher than what the appraised value that it came at. A couple of other methods for dealing with that might be to rebut the appraisal, where you as the agent, this is not super successful, even if you're very good at it and have very clear comps, but chances are you won't have super clear comps in this instance. Otherwise, it most likely would not have appraised under the purchase price. So you can rebut it by submitting listings to the appraiser, but the appraiser doesn't like to show the bank that they were wrong, right? They don't like to. So they might adjust it, but let's say that $50,000 difference, they might adjust the value up $20,000. They could adjust it the full amount, but more likely than not, they usually don't. So the second thing that can happen is the buyer can instead order a second appraisal depending upon the conditions of the loan. If you're working with if your buyer is working with a lender directly, that's not going to be the case. If they're working with a mortgage broker, they can do that. It might cause some delays with the loan. It might not. It's definitely just an avenue for you to explore if you have this issue. Because that is really the only way at this point that we are oftentimes getting our buyer offer accepted. So I want you to know, very specifically how to deal with that instance. All right. So let's talk about some of the things in the contract we can do now, right? So RPA. Here we are. Okay. So you can offer to have your buyer pay some of the fees that the seller typically does. Okay. Sorry, we'll just go in order. So if you don't have to waive the appraisal contingency, perhaps your buyer's lender says it's safe to waive or lift the loan contingency with the offer. That's something else that can happen. Again, both of these things really need to be discussed with your buyer. There's some inherent risk or potential risk with it. And their loan professional, your mortgage broker, definitely has to be willing to tell you to do this. If your buyer is working with a direct lender, most likely they're not going to be willing to tell you to do either of these things. So again, when you're working with a buyer in this competitive market, if you see that their pre-qualification is from Wells Fargo, Bank of America, anything like that, you'll definitely want to sit down and have a conversation with them, that because everything is so competitive and we might have to work this in order to get their offer accepted, you really encourage them to go get pre-qualification with a mortgage broker who can bury things, reorder things if they need to. I have a question. Question is, has Christen video? Oh, am I freezing, guys? Erin, you've been freezing for me and no one else has.
Oh, really?
Like the last time you spoke, there was a couple second delay.
Okay, probably just me then.
Can anyone weigh in? Am I freezing? Okay. Looks like no. Okay. Have your buyer really try to get them to sit down with a mortgage broker and work with the mortgage broker, because the loan process might be so tricky right now. The appraisal might be so tricky right now when we're up against this type of competition. A mortgage broker, like I said, is going to have so many more options to deal with these things. Whereas a lender, they only have the bank. They have to submit all documentation to the bank direct. They have access to a few dozen loan programs, if that. Whereas a mortgage broker has access to potentially thousands, endless amount of loans. So mortgage broker is very key in this super competitive market. Let's talk about appraisal. So appraisal, I always ask my buyer's loan professional if we can do 14 days. 17 is just not cool in this market, but obviously I might have to waive it. But if I'm not in a situation to have to waive it, I want it as short as possible. But again, not up to me. Buyer's loan professional has to answer that. Same thing with the loan contingency. In this competitive market, if you even get to have one, 17 is pretty much the max you want to write. But again, you have to get the approval from the buyer's loan professional in order to shorten this from 21 at all. We're talking about lifting contingencies with the offer, either appraisal or loan, but I never want to see, if you can avoid it at all, I never want to see both appraisal and loan contingency removed. That means your buyer has zero protection. Now, if your buyer understands the risks involved with that and they still want to do it, and the loan professional says, this is something we can probably do, and you're all on the same page, you can do that. But I just want you to know that you generally only lift one of these, not both. And right now, the appraisal contingency being lifted is more valuable to the listing agents than the loan contingency is. Okay. Let's see here. So allocation of costs, we can offer for the buyer to pay for some of the costs that the seller typically would, and I'll show you which ones are safe to do and which ones aren't. So the buyer could offer to pay for the natural hazard zone disclosure report. And if they do that, that's fine. It typically costs somewhere under $150. So that's a pretty safe one to do. When I am offering to pay for the NHD report, I'm generally not doing it in my opening offer. Okay, so I'm going to teach you all the tricks and stops, but my whole rationale for that is I want to be at the top of the pack, right? I always want to be in the consideration of the seller. But if there are 20, 30 offers out there, unless the listing agent tells me otherwise, most likely I'm going to receive a counter offer. And so I want to save my last tricks and tips for my, or, you know, my last offer, my last perks for my counter offer. Because at this point, what I'm seeing the general trend is right now is that sellers with this amount of counter offers, they're doing one counter offer and then they're kind of choosing the buyer at that point. Because when you have 20, 30 offers, you probably aren't, first off, aren't responding to all of them. You're probably responding to the best 10 offers, okay? But that's not always the case. So ask the listing agent, very key that you ask the listing agent. And then they're submitting a seller multiple counter offer to, you know, that 5 or 10 best offers that they receive. And once they do that, in my buyer counter offer, I am typically offering these things like paying the NHD. All right, government requirements and retrofit. This is a seller paid fee. I do not recommend that the buyer takes on this fee. Why? We don't know how much it's going to cost, if anything, if it's even required by whatever city you're writing the offer in. Okay, we don't know how much it's going to cost, so we don't like saying the buyer's going to pay for it. That covers like the stuff necessary for certificate of compliance and the 9A building report, stuff like that for the city of Los Angeles. Okay, that's B1 and 2, all of that section all covers retrofitting and safety standard compliance regulations for city and state. Not all cities have them. So if it's not city, it would be subject to state requirements, which are carbon monoxide, smoke detector, water heater strapping. And I'm sure there's some other ones, but those are the big ones. As far as like city of Los Angeles, we have additional requirements there, like automatic gas shutoff valve, I think low flow water devices and fixtures, stuff like that. So it's a little more restrictive. So I don't recommend having the buyer offer that. I don't recommend having the buyer offer to pay escrow fees. And that is because, again, we don't know what they're going to be, right? There's a base escrow fee, but buyer and seller have their own escrow fees. Let's say seller has liens or multiple payoffs that are normal recorded against the property. Escrow charges to process those and obtain payoffs and do everything they need to for title to pay off a lien holder through the close of escrow. They may need some extra deeds done. Perhaps the seller has been married since he purchased the property as a single man. So again, I don't recommend that the buyer pays any escrow fees for the seller because we don't know what they're going to be. If you feel like you need to offer to pay for some escrow fees, perhaps you can offer a flat amount on an addendum and say, you know, maybe buyer will contribute $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is toward seller escrow fees. But this is not very standard. And so, you know, unless you really had to pull out every single stop on earth to have your offer considered, I wouldn't offer that. Same thing with title. Okay. And it's not usually $1,000, $2,000. These fees are usually, depending on, they're all calculated on the purchase price, but they're several $1,000s each, or a few at least. Section D, county and city transfer tax. Not every region handles these the same. Typically the seller pays them, but sometimes buyer and seller split them depending upon the area. Like Aaron, we did Redondo Beach, right? And they split the city transfer tax there. And not all cities even have transfer tax. County does, but not all cities. So, you know, could you find out what the county transfer tax was and offer to pay for it? Absolutely. And that could be something that got your offer accepted. You would get that information from escrow title professional to calculate that out for you. So you could tell your clients what, you know, what that dollar amount would be. This is going to be based on the sale price. So if that sale price changes, you have to keep in mind, all I need to tell my buyer is no longer going to be this amount. Now it's going to be this amount. As it increases or decreases. Well, I've never seen it decrease, but as the purchase price increases, as you have rounds of counter offers. Let's see here. All right, home warranty, you can see on this offer that I wrote, I went ahead and you can see this box down here. I had my buyer waive the home warranty. This is one of my favorite ways to make my offer more attractive. or my counter offer more attractive. The cost of a home warranty plan is fairly minimal in relation to the purchase price and closing costs. It's also calculated on square footage. It is calculated on square footage and features and coverage. So a home warranty policy can range anywhere from like the $450 range to several $1,000 range, depending on upon the square footage and type of property that it is. Multifamily property can be really, really expensive. But, you know, I explained to my buyer, hey, let's offer no home warranty. Again, I knew the listing agent on this transaction. I had a pretty strong indication that my buyer's offer was going to be accepted. Typically, if I didn't know the agent and I felt like I had tons of competition, I would not be waiving this home warranty purchase in my original offer. I would be saving it for my counter offer. You know, so I explained to my buyer, hey, do you want to buy this home warranty yourself? We can waive it on the contract, and it's more likely that the sellers will accept your offer. If the seller has any concern about keeping any items, obviously not asking for them would be helpful to the offer. But most sellers, and I shouldn't say most, but you know, it's like 50-50. Half the time sellers don't care, maybe even more than half. They don't care. They plan on leaving their appliances. Why? Most of the time they're going to be appliances included in their, you know, purchase elsewhere or whatever rental property they're going into. But also appliances are very, you know, related to the space in which they sit. And if they don't know where they're going to be living, you know, they very likely will need new appliances. Let's see here. All right. Also very common, particularly in this market. Sellers have all the power. So it's very likely, not likely, it's very common when you call the listing agent, you know, tell them you're going to be submitting an offer. One of the questions I always ask them is, hey, is there anything that the seller wants? And the seller may want a lease back, which is a general term. A lease back means that the seller is going to stay in the property after it closes. There are several ways to do this. The first one is up here. If it's just for a couple of days and the buyer doesn't want any money, it would be safe to use this section that the seller is going to deliver possession to the buyer no later than blank calendar days after the close of escrow. I would not use this section unless it was, you know, nothing more than maybe 4 days. Anything more than that, but under 30. So anything more than 4, but up to 29, you're going to use car form SIP. Okay. Seller to remain in possession. Anything 30 or more days, you would use car form RLAS, residential lease after sale. Okay. Keep in mind, buyer lenders do not like to see leasebacks of more than 45 days. That might be an issue for them. Okay. So on all of these forms, well, in this instance of using an SIP or an RLAS, there's an option for the buyer to charge a per diem or monthly or weekly or whatever. They're basically charging the seller for the amount of time they're in the property. And the typical amount to charge them would be what's referred to as PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So basically the seller, through the close of escrow, if you know the time frame that the seller is going to remain in the property, would typically pay the buyer's PITI, their actual carrying cost, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. If there's an HOA, you'd also want to include HOA dues in there. But let's say you need to make your buyer offer very attractive. Perhaps you offer a free leaseback, or perhaps a discounted leaseback, you know, a rate of $100 per day, whatever it is. So that could make your offer look a little bit more attractive. But we're only doing this if the listing agent says, hey, the seller needs a leaseback. Do you guys know why a seller might need a leaseback? Any ideas?
If they haven't bought a new property to move to.
Yeah, and they need the funds from their closing in order to close their purchase, right? They need the funds from their sale in order to complete their purchase, or they haven't found a property, or both. Exactly. Okay. Let's talk about whatever else. Okay. Section 14B. This is often referred to as the physical inspection contingency. Guys, this is not just a physical. This is the buyer's investigation contingency. So it includes a lot. Okay. But people just call it physical. So I wanted you to know the difference. Making this as short as possible, 14B, is going to make the offer more attractive to the seller and listing agent. Well, let's be honest, to the listing agent. The listing agent is the one who breaks it down for the seller. So the contract says 17. 17 is unheard of, and it has been even before pandemic and this, sharp increase in sales. Buyers versus inventory. 7 is really tough, guys. I don't recommend that. Okay, so for a condominium, I would say 7 to 10 days is doable. Okay, but you're going to have to set up inspections right away, really be on at the top of your game, getting stuff done. And you very likely will have to call around to a bunch of inspectors because they're super busy right now. And, maybe take your second or third choice, and you don't really get to control the time at that point, right? You just need your inspections done and your inspection reports back prior to this deadline, this time frame here, whatever date is in here. And this date is calculated from the date of acceptance. So, the second I open an escrow, even prior to this market, the first thing I do is I order inspections. So on a single family, I would say typically 10 to 14 days is about the tightest reasonable time frame you can get all your inspections done and review everything and get a request for repair out or have time to analyze it and lift the contingency. So, just keep that in mind, but shortening this is going to be really attractive. So you can see that this is a single family, but I offered 7 days. I was able to do that because I set up the inspections before I even got the acceptance. I set up the inspections at the time that I got when I made the offer. Like I said, I had a pretty strong indication that my offer was going to get accepted on this one. It's kind of a catch-22. If you set inspections at the time you make an offer, but you don't get the property, don't end up in escrow and cancel the appointments, it's a good way to sort of alienate yourself from the inspectors you want to use, where next time you call them, they're not really willing to make an appointment for you while they're so busy. But at the same time, it would allow you to offer something, more competitive that would possibly lend to you being the accepted offer. So just weigh those pros and cons out if you're going to use the method that I did. Okay, removal of contingencies with the offer. I removed the appraisal contingency with this offer. And in all honesty, if I remove the appraisal contingency, which is back up here. Okay, so section I here, you can see that I checked is not contingent upon an appraisal. I did not actually need to check this box down here. Wait, where is it? I did not need to check 14C, removal of contingencies with the offer. It's already indicated in the offer. The offer is just made without the contingency. But I like checking it because then I get to add a contingency removal form to my offer. And I like to put it right on top of my offer package when I submit it. So it's the very first thing that the listing agent sees. I think it makes the offer look stronger, and you're not doing anything other than using a psychological kind of trick, a visual trick to make your offer stand out and stand apart. So if you're going to remove any contingencies within the offer or with the offer, even though you don't need to, I would recommend checking this box, adding a contingency removal number 1 and putting it right on top. So it's the very first thing that the listing agent sees. Now, granted, one other thing is I told you because I wrote the offer with no appraisal contingency, I wouldn't need this. But let's say you're writing the offer with a contingency removing a contingency that wasn't clearly addressed in the contract. The part of 14B, maybe A, 14A or B, it's a report, right? But let's say you got it before you wrote the offer, or, you know, around the listing agent had the prelim already, gave it to you. And so you can lift that. The contingency removal actually has all of 14A and B broken out into its individual parts. So like there's a seller inspection, seller disclosure contingency, HOA document contingency, preliminary title report contingency, I think insurability contingency. These are all lumped together in our contract under 14A and 14B, but on the actual contingency removal, there are individual checkboxes for all the different parts of 14A and 14B. So I don't want you to think you don't need contingency removal if you are lifting a contingency that is lumped together under those sections. Okay, does that make sense to everyone?
Yes. Kristen, I have a question.
Sure.
I know maybe it's not into the subject that you're explaining right now, but for the appraisal contingency removal, I've heard that for VA and FHA loan, we as representing the buyers, we cannot waive the appraisal contingency for VA or FHA. So I have a situation.
I think you could waive it on the contract,
yeah,
but it's you can't waive an appraisal contingency for any loan, just have an FYI, not just FHA or VA.
Mm-hmm.
Can't waive it. You can still have an appraisal if you have no contingency. It's just you have no protection for the loan. So I don't know for a fact that the FHA or VA lender would accept an offer that has the appraisal contingency waived, but I do think they would. It would be just like a standard loan. They still have to have the appraisal, but if it doesn't appraise, you can't have the loan.
I think for what I've heard, that it looks like even though there can be a waive, let's say,
Yeah.
but the buyer is still protected by the VA, that even though that is not appraised, he still can back down from the offer.
Oh yeah, based
receive
on the
the
loan
deposit
contingency. You can still back out of the offer based on the loan contingency. Yeah.
Okay.
So as long as you check with the buyer's loan professional, I would actually think it advantageous then to lift the appraisal contingency if that's the case. But double check with them. I don't know that that is the case. FHA and VA loans are really, really particular. I've only done a few in my entire career. So I'm not going to speak to, you know, the exacts on that. I would always, even myself, no matter what I thought I knew, I would always just divert to the buyer's loan professional on those. They're very, very unique. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's see here. Oh, you could also, I want you guys to know that all contracts are made as is. It is part of the language of our contract, but most people don't know that. And so if your buyer, you know, is willing to overlook nitpicky items, and they should be in this market, otherwise they probably need a little reality check on how competitive it is. You could probably write into a counter offer that property condition to be delivered will be offer made based on as is property condition. Seller will not make any credits. So you could put that in your counter. Now, that does not keep you from being able to have the legal opportunity to ask the seller for credit if the buyer discovers something, or the buyer's inspectors discover something really terrible during the inspection process. It would obviously rub the seller a little bit the wrong way. But you know, if there's a major foundation issue that no one knew about, they probably would anticipate that even if you wrote as is, you're going to ask for some sort of repair or credit in relation to it. So it doesn't mean that the buyer can't ask. All contracts are already as is, and we ask all the time, right? But it could be a little psychological trick use within the counter offer process. I like this one as much, but you could do it. And you could just write as is. You would just have to have this conversation that I'm having with you right now with your buyer and make sure they're comfortable with that. And remember that it would color the seller's expectation of what is going to happen with the buyer's inspections and any subsequent requests. They would probably expect for there not to be one. And even if there was a major repair, you know, fingers crossed, hope that there isn't one. But probably expect that you guys would make one anyhow if it was something major. So let's see. I don't think there's anything else in here. Let's talk about, I'm going to stop the screen share. Something called an escalation clause. Do you guys know what that is?
To increase your offer if there's another offer that's higher up to a certain amount.
Yeah, so it's a clause that will automatically increase the offer price of your buyer's offer based upon the highest offer that another buyer comes in with. And I'm gonna copy and paste some language into the chat box for you, the one I like the most. What's really important about it is that it has a cap, right? Your buyer's not going to offer a blank check. So if someone comes in, you know, $1 million higher than what you were expecting, you know, they're not bound to purchase it at that price. And you'll understand a little bit more of what I'm talking about when I paste that language for you. Another component to it is that you need to see proof of that highest offer. That way, you know, the listing agent and seller aren't bluffing you. Okay, so I'm going to find that language for you and I will post it. Give me a second here. Can anyone think about anything else we could do with the offer? Not with the listing agent. And I'm going to talk about, you know, like etiquette, the extra things that aren't transactionally related that will help, but anything contract or transactionally related. No?
A higher earnest money deposit percentage.
Oh, yes. I should have covered that. Thank you. We will cover that. I can't believe I missed that. Thank you. Who was that, Gabby?
Yeah.
I'm looking at my email, so I can't see you guys right now. I'm trying to find the escalation clause language for you. You joined us very recently, right, Gabby?
Yeah, this is my second week.
How do you know so much about this stuff?
I'm doing a lot of research. I'm trying to learn as much as I can.
Where are you researching? Because it's some pretty good research from what I'm hearing from you.
Just like all over the internet, podcasts, join Facebook groups with other new agents.
Good. Let's see. Escalation clause. All right. Where's the chat box? All right, so I just gave you some very, very good language that I drafted with an attorney a long time ago. That works very well and protects your buyer, kind of covers all the bases. So you might want to copy that and save it somewhere. But yeah, let's talk about increased deposit. So can anyone tell me what our standard deposit or earnest money deposit percentages of the purchase price? What's industry standard? Yeah, exactly, 3%. So you can offer more or less, but more looks stronger, right? So what's a disadvantage if we offer more on earnest money?
It can be non-refundable.
Yeah, so if the buyer lifts all their contingencies but fails to close, whatever dollar amount is written into the earnest money section for the deposit, that is what is up for grabs potentially by the seller. There is a different way to do it. You would use a section of the contract. It's also on page 1, just a couple of sections below the earnest money deposit. It's increased deposit. An increased deposit would typically be a secondary deposit that is given to escrow by the buyer, either a certain number of days after escrow is opened, certain number of days following acceptance, or upon an event. And I prefer that an increased deposit is delivered to escrow upon an event taking place. Most typically, or my favorite event to base it on would be buyer's removal of the physical inspection contingency. So we've done all of our inspections, we're good, so we're going to give an increased deposit. What's advantageous about possibly using the increased deposit section is that money is not sitting in escrow, pending inspections, which, as we all know, can kill a deal almost instantly, or, if something big is found, kill a deal instantly. But also because an increased deposit is not necessarily up for grabs by the seller like the earnest money deposit is. There's one thing that you'd have to do in order to make the increased deposit available for the seller to go after, like the earnest money deposit. And that would be to include car form RID, okay? So can you write an increased deposit and not include car form RID? Yes, and that's how I try to do it every single time. I only actually deliver the RID form, making, allowing for that increased deposit to be available to the seller to go after in the case that the buyer fails to close after they remove all their contingencies if I get caught. Okay, so if I do increased deposit, I don't include RID unless the listing agent says, hey, I need car form RID. And most agents don't read and they don't know. So likely is that they wouldn't catch you and they wouldn't know. What else? Guys, a letter to the seller, buyer's letter to seller. CAR, the California Association of Realtors, has recently issued statements discouraging a buyer love letter to seller. In these letters, typically the buyer, flatters the seller, talking about, how lovely their home is, what they, kind of a dream version of what they believe their future life in the home would be like if they have the opportunity to purchase it, and telling them a little bit about themselves and whoever, their family or whoever else they're purchasing with or would be living there with them. So telling them about, what in their life translates to perfect use of the home. So I disagree. I mean, the reason CAR is discouraging these letters is they're concerned about the discrimination towards a potential buyer by a seller, because a lot of times photos are included in this, and they may disclose personal information about themselves. The buyer may disclose personal information about themselves that could color the seller's opinion if they had any sort of discrimination, feelings of discrimination. But we live in Los Angeles. There, of course, is always a chance for that. But I don't think it's as prevalent in the area that we live in as other places. And in all honesty, at this point, sellers primarily care about price. I can only see this letter really helping. Of course, there's always going to be that horrible person that's an exception, but I really only see this type of letter helping. Okay, buyer agents will sometimes omit a letter to the seller if the owners are developers. Again, I might agree with this, but there are the exceptions. Let's say that my buyers are, one is a doctor and one is, I don't know, some high-paying job or some job that is typically received with respect and, high regard. I would still have my buyers write that letter to seller and kind of drop that in there, anything that might impress them. Why it would lend to even a developer client's belief that the buyers are going to be able to, will close or have a higher chance of closing. They have these great jobs, they must have money, that sort of thing. They probably have an easier time getting their loan approved, right? We're trying to lend to the idea that this is the most solid buyer, and at the same time flatter them. So I would still encourage a letter if I thought that it would help in any way. I also modify or edit these letters with my buyer's permission. If I do feel like there's anything in there that could be perceived in a poor way or received poorly, I do take it out or reword it to sort of make it a little more obscure. Any more ideas, Gabby? Anything you've read or heard that I haven't covered?
No, that's all that I've heard of.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Except for, guys, what can you personally do? Ingratiate yourself to the listing agent. Okay, it's really important. So before you submit an offer, you want to be professional. You want to ask questions like, what escrow and what title company do you want me to write into the offer? You want your offer to be beautifully written so that they're impressed with your work ethic. It's going to lead the listing agent, even if it's just on a subconscious level, to believe that you are a very skilled agent and you're more likely to close. Why? If you're a skilled agent, more likely you have good experience and you're going to be able to control and direct your client well, right? So your first impression is going to be that phone call. Your second impression is going to be how well written and error-free your offer is. I am not above like flattering the listing agent. I don't want to be overt about it. I don't want to be obvious, but you know, when I call them, I will tell them fantastic photos of great listing. You know, I might have searched them on the MLS to see if they've had any other recent sales in the area, and I can kind of congratulate them on that. I want them to like me. It is really important to my buyers. I am more likely to get information from the listing agent that's going to help me secure the transaction, right? When I have a listing and I have multiple offers, I definitely tell my sellers, hey, you know, if I had two offers that are exactly the same, we would most likely counter them, but I'm still going to tell my seller, hey, this listing or this buyer agent is really great. You know, maybe I know this person, or maybe I just really like the conduct that they've had with me in my interactions with them, you know, up to that time. So you know, my perception of the buyers, my perception of their agent, of their skill, my preference for them, it definitely does come into play, particularly when offers are very similar. So it's very important that the listing agent likes you, that you're professional. Also follow up. You know, you don't want to pester the listing agent, but you absolutely want to be in contact with them. Every time you speak to them, you have the opportunity to obtain a little tidbit of information you might not have had previously. A few years back, my cousins called me like late at night on Sunday, maybe like 8:30, 9 p.m. They told me they were walking around the block or on a walk one day and walked into an open house. They were not pre-qualified. They were not thinking about buying a house, but they fell in love with this house and they wanted to buy it. There were already 20 offers on it. And I got that property for them. I wasn't sure I would. And I think it was primarily through my interaction with the listing agent. After close, you know, she thought we were real friends. I wasn't quite there yet. Over the years since then, our friendship, a real friendship, has actually developed. And she's a huge agent, and I'm so thankful that I have that rapport with her. So even when you're not in an actual offer situation, I think that your conduct in the real estate community and with your fellow agents is always going to be super important. Always keep that in mind when, particularly, you know, anything contentious, to always, you know, be the bigger person, turn the cheek, be euphematic in what you say, right? It's not productive, and it does not behoove you to push. Even when I have something negative to say or I'm putting my foot down, I try to do it in a positive way. It will follow you around this very small community where a very small number of agents do majority of the business. Anything else anyone wants to ask, or any suggestions or ideas anyone has that they can share with us?
Yes, I want to ask something.
Sure.
Again, about the contingency, but I just ask, for example, for the lender, because the loan contingency that I'm with in the transaction that I'm right now is due on the 17th. The lender just told me that we don't have to wait for the appraisal report because the file is already on underwriting. That means it's safe to remove contingency, the loan contingency?
No, if it's an underwriting, it doesn't have a formal loan contingency. Maybe they're talking about the appraisal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, if it's in the underwriting, the loan is not approved.
Okay.
So you'll want to ask the lender that directly. Lenders a lot of times use confusing language, and I think they do it on purpose. So, you might want to ask them, perhaps they're saying the appraisal has been waived. Sometimes in this market since the pandemic, lenders have been waiving appraisals internally, like on their end, not the offer, not the agent buyer end. So you might want to clarify, just ask to try to clarify and say, hey, are you saying that the appraisal's been waived and I can lift that contingency? Yeah,
Okay.
but and even myself with my preferred lender, I always put it in writing. Is it safe to lift the, whatever contingency I want to lift? Is it safe to lift the appraisal contingency? Is it safe to lift the loan contingency? If not, when will it be? What else do we need?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, in black
Sounds
and
good.
white, in writing. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome. Are you in a transaction?
Yeah, I'm in escrow right now.
Congratulations.
My first escrow,
Yay.
and I'm making an offer for another property for another couple. It's just this one can be a little tricky because we waive the appraisal, but the offer that we did is high. So the appraisal asked us to. He said about tide waters yesterday, so we have tide waters. I don't know, something the lenders mentioned that word. They're saying
Tide waters? Is it, wait, where's the property?
Oh, it's just the sand comes to justify the price, the purchase price that we have to send comps to the appraiser to find out the price of the property or what was sold.
Okay, so you guys need to do an appraisal rebuttal, maybe. That sounds like it's not safe to lift the appraisal contingency. I'd have to see all the language, but what you're telling me is kind of contradictory, so I'm not really sure. I'd have to actually see it.
Yeah, it basically the appraiser went there already. He didn't give the report. He asked me to send a couple of comps to him from the MLS to support the price of the property.
That's a little unusual. Typically, they'd ask the listing agent.
Oh, really? Yeah, he asked me to send that to him. So I sent already. So I'm just waiting for the response, the report. Honestly, I'm not thinking, because just in words, the purchase price is 335,000. The last sold property that was sold there was for 310,000. So I'm not expecting to be all the way to 335,000, but at least 315 or 310, I'm already happy. So my buyers don't pay that much difference.
Yeah, perhaps the appraiser's actually trying to help you out and ask because he doesn't feel like it's going to appraise. Were there multiple offers on the deal?
Yes, it was, I think, 4
Okay,
offers.
that's something you should definitely mention to the appraiser as well. They do take that into consideration when they're appraising. Also, you might want to call any under contract. So you can pull under contract listings up on the MLS just the same way you would as sold properties for a CMA. And you could actually call the listing agent and find out what price they're in escrow for, like anything that would be comparable but is not yet closed. And you could provide the contact information of that listing agent to the appraiser and tell them to contact them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. My housekeeper is here and my dog is barking. Do we have any more questions, guys? Gloria, stop. Hi, Gloria. Do you guys have any more questions?
No more questions. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right then, guys. Dino, stop it. Sorry, did someone else ask something? No? Okay.
I said no.
It's okay. All right, I'm going in the kitchen. I can actually hear now. Was there another question? No?
No.
Okay, great. Well then, thanks guys. I hope that you have a fantastic week. I will see you guys next Thursday.
Thank
You
you.
too.
You're welcome.
you.
Bye guys.